have down, you know, your that, and so just kind of go through that timeline and some of the stories. You know, what we had were like the run over by the helicopter, you know, hit by a car, falling out of the moving car. Donald Duck, how you guys came to speak Donald Duck, and
Are you rolling, Jake?
you know, the Potbelly story, and when Uncle Paul got his eye caught on the fence, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And so all the sawmill type of stories, and pulling Paul's hair, and
Swimming with crocodiles?
swimming with the crocodiles. So we'd like to hear all these childhood stories, and maybe if you could start, you know, when you were born, and give a little background on why you were. It's in Logan, that's right. Both of you were born in Logan, and why you were there.
No, I was born in Glendale, California.
Okay.
But I just wanted to make a little introduction on.
Make sure you guys project when you're
Okay.
talking so that you're picked up nice and clear on the mic.
I just want to explain the difference between my hair and Paul's hair, and I'm responsible for both of the differences, the amount and the color. I color my hair because I found out that people don't like to go to the old dentist. They don't compete as good. So I keep mine as dark as I can keep it. But I let it grow out a little bit in deference to him. And there will be a story later about how I pulled hair out of his head with a pair of pliers. And so that's why that. But he's returned the favor to me about hair, because I did let a little bit of the gray come out. But Paul, we had a cousin, Nedra, die, and only 2 weeks before the funeral, or so, maybe less than that, probably less than that, we were going to meet each other without knowing that we would, because his funeral came up, and then he just slipped in that he had lost how many pounds? I don't know, it was about 30 pounds or something like that. He was skinny, and I still was pretty good, you know. And he didn't give me a chance to even lose any weight before I was right in front of all the relatives. And so I thought that he did that to me a lot of times when we were little. He would sneak things in to compete with me and beat me in it because he practiced stuff. But I see that he's gone back to giving me, you know, we're about the same now, so I appreciate that.
How far along are you?
5 months. That's what I was telling you about 5 months.
No, I'm sorry, anyway, that, I just wanted to put that in. We've always had real competition, but real brotherly love.
All right, so tell us where you're born, and
I guess I'll start out. I was born down in California because Mom and Dad had gone down there to, when they got married, and in Glendale, California, on March 13th, 1943.
Boy,
And
just make sure your arms
after the war, when Dad was drafted into the Army, Mom went up to Seattle to up area. Can't remember.
Wait a minute.
Bremerton's where she went to.
I think we need to back up just a little bit, to give a little background, and you know, before you were born, and what Mom and Dad were doing. Well, not literally.
I actually know a story about him that I'm not going to tell
Well,
right now about
well,
how
my
Paul
mom
got started.
Well, Mom told me that.
Oh, she did?
She did.
I
Yeah.
think she told all of us that. She was quite proud.
She told
So
me
you know
about
the
that
story?
right this morning.
Yes.
We better wait till innocent ears are out of the room.
Yeah.
All right, so give us the background, Paul, on Grandma and Grandpa before Dad came to be.
Well, Mom and Dad met at a roller rink, Logan roller rink. And Dad, as the story goes, was kind of a hotshot roller skater. And he used to jump barrels and do a lot of fancy footwork with his skates. And he met Mom there, and they, I think she wasn't more than about 18 or 19 at that time, don't you think? Probably.
Probably, yeah.
But, she was a very, very beautiful young lady that caught his eye. But they, they courted for a while, but Dad went out to California with his brother, Carlisle. We call him Uncle Mickey. And he worked out in California and built, I think they were building homes there, weren't they? And it was around the Los Angeles area that they were building homes. And this must have been, what would you say the year was? Probably around 1939, 1940.
I'm just guessing, I don't know.
But certainly before the war started. But and you'll have to fill this in a little bit, but there was correspondence back and forth, and some growing impatience, I think, on the part of Mom about where this relationship was going. And I think that didn't she kind of give him an ultimatum to kind of fish or cut bait, because he was lingering in her mind longer than he should out in California and not furthering this courtship. And so my understanding was that then he invited Mom to come out to California, and that's where they got married, not long after that. Can you kind of fill in the corners? Do you remember?
You know, I can't remember too much about Mom putting pressure on you, but it's usually the men that are slowest to come around to figure out what's supposed to be done. And so that's probably true.
Well, I never got married unless Hannah asked me.
Well, your mom, they've been talking about getting married, and he was down in California. And I know your mom that's when she had her trousseau tea, and her mother did not want her to get married.
Yeah, Grandma Rogers' Nana was against her marrying Dad.
Or probably anybody.
Well, because she
And
was supporting the family.
My
She
mom
was-
was supporting the family and her mainstay, and she didn't want to let her go.
Yeah, and she did everything. And so but anyway, she had her own little trousseau tea, which would be like a shower, or kind of like a wedding reception in a way. It was a little more elaborate. And then she went down to California. In the meantime, her dad got Grandma or Nana to go down there. For heaven's sake, it's your daughter getting married, and took her down there. And I think he picked up your dad and brought him to the wedding. Now, of course, Mickey and Elaine weren't there. I mean, this was a big part of it. Weren't they became the Squatleys?
No, that was after we were the Squatleys later.
Later. You were there then? Okay.
Yeah, I was there when I was a Squatley.
And then
That's
they got
why
married.
we're a squad.
That's right. So they got married down there, and Nana came, and everything was good after that. But she just did not want her daughter to get married. But it came through in the end.
What about Grandpa Rogers, her dad? Was he around, and did he like?
He's the one that
Grandpa?
got her to. He was the one that got her to go. He was really in the background almost all the time.
Huh.
But
So he liked
Why was
Grandpa?
Grandma supporting the family? Was Grandpa
Like financially, she was supporting them?
Yeah.
What was
Their
she working
father
as?
had a really bad stroke.
No, that's way
That was
later.
way later.
But what
This
was
is
her
like when
job
Mom
when
and
she
Dad
was
were first getting
supporting?
married.
he was gone about 7 days a
thought that
week, and
Well, you have to understand that they had just come through the Depression, and everybody was scrimping and saving, and Grandma and Grandpa Rogers were cooks. And they actually owned a restaurant or two, didn't they?
Yeah.
At different times. That I don't think they were ever very successful in the restaurant business, but both of them were excellent cooks. But they didn't make very much money, and that generation and generations preceding, there was always the mentality and the expectation that children growing up on the farm they would work and they would help the family earn their bread, because it was a tough life that they lived, and they needed all hands on board to be able.
Mom was taking care of her little sister too, which was
Yeah,
quite a
Nana
big
was
effort.
working.
Yeah, that's true.
Nana was working with him, and he was gone someplace in some time of that, because I remember even in Washington he was, or something like that. But
Yeah. My grandpa Rogers, Howard, he worked like for over 20 years, 7 days a week.
And Nana worked with him, and so
he
Edna
never
was
had a
to
day off in
babysit
over 20
and
years.
help bring
Wow.
in the money because they didn't have enough money.
Man.
Yeah, it was just a very, very Spartan, rough life that they lived, and they moved back and forth between Logan and Pocatello, or not, I guess Pocatello,
Preston, some.
Preston. They lived in those areas.
Huh.
Eventually, Grandpa Rogers was in the Army as an Army cook, wasn't he, for a while?
I don't know. Didn't know about that.
I think he was. And my memory may be wrong, but I think he actually was in the Army up in Washington, and he came down
That could have been.
from Washington to the wedding. And so Grandma and Grandpa were not even together.
They worked together a lot, and that's why
At that
Edna
time.
did so much.
She counted on her so much.
Counted
Yeah,
on
she
her a
just,
lot.
that was the biggest thing, is she didn't.
I don't think it was a particularly selfish thing motivated. Grandma was not that kind of a person, but I think that it was just born out of necessity and the worry about, what was going to happen. And I think Aunt Rosemary was still young. I think, what's the age difference? There was like,
10 years, 9 years between.
yeah, I think there was 9 years. And so you're looking at Mom, who was probably 19, 20 years of age, and a 10 or 11-year-old sister still at home.
She said she basically raised Rosemary
Huh.
because both parents were gone all the time.
Yeah.
Most all the time.
Uncle Dennis, can you see that thing ticking away? Does it look like it's still going?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so they got him down there and they did get married, and then you lived there a while, or you were born there?
Well, let me just say a little bit more too, because didn't Dad get pneumonia, and that delayed them getting married?
Boy, he's got a better memory than me. I don't remember that.
I think he was sick. He had pneumonia, and I think that delayed things as well. But they eventually got married civilly there.
Nana made the cake.
Nana made the cake. Yeah, and the records will show that it was longer than 9 months after they got married that I was born.
That's one of the matters we wanted to.
We wanted to
know.
get that straight. Yeah, and I know it's straight with him, but, and when the war came along, and Dad didn't get into the war right away because he was working at Tim Aircraft Company down in Los Angeles, and they were making airplanes.
And by the way, just to put it in context, they got married in November, and Pearl Harbor was in that December. So they'd only been married for 1 month, and then the war broke out.
And that's when America got into it.
Right.
The war went into it.
Yeah, so, Dad was, there's a picture of him, it should be put on Facebook for everybody, but there's a picture of Dad with all of his crew, and he was like 23 or so, something like that, and he was the boss of a whole shift of about 80 people, including his parents, that worked at Tim Aircraft Company, because Dad was a good leader and knew how to get people to do things, and
So Thomas worked at Tim Aircraft?
yeah, Thomas and Leola both, his mom and dad worked on his crew. There's a picture, you can find them on that big picture of them. And my uncle said, Uncle Ham Wiley said that my dad was an extremely hard worker, and he didn't think anything of working 16 hours a day, well into the night on those things. And he was a very hard worker, and
I think you two are just like him too.
well, maybe
What
so.
kind of aircraft did they make?
I don't know. That would be interesting to find out. But
I think they made
Not
the
jets.
Grumman Hellcat fighter plane was the plane that they.
is that right?
Where was this?
This is down in L.A.
Oh,
I think it was in Van Nuys.
Van Nuys, someplace like that down there. They had this, and that's why Dad, I just surmised that's why he wasn't in the Army earlier, but they did take him in before they invaded Okinawa. And that's when he went into service, and that's when Mom went up to Bremerton to stay with her family, took me up there. And
John, you want to say anything about your birth? And your conception.
I don't know anything about that. You know about that? He was in the pre-existing watching all this.
Your mom had the most particular
Oh, that's right.
particular doctor that was
Yes.
the best one
He was
all in
best.
the area.
Yeah, Dr. Marshall.
And everybody had a pound bend in the waist every time he came, and the nurses jumped and did what he said, and he took really good care of your
And
mom.
he was,
Yep,
he
he
was
did.
the
He was a very famous OB guy. Foremost
but
doctor.
she would say foremost.
Foremost, that's right.
Yeah.
I told Mom that she used to say carn and bark and stuff. And I did not, I never did that. We played a tape for her once and she had to admit it. The old St. George accent, I think's what it was, because they lived down there some when she was a little girl.
Oh, they did?
And she got sunstroke down there.
That's why she could go in the sun after that without
Oh,
an umbrella.
my.
Yeah, that's why she always had her umbrella with her.
Wow.
But, so, any more about that? I don't know anything about the conception. I know you do, but I don't.
It happened.
And then you went up to Washington, and then
I think I was 2.5, because I was born in 43, and Dad was at Okinawa in early 45. But I do have a memory from up there, sitting at a table. My very first memory, sitting at a table in Grandpa's restaurant, but it was act in the kitchen where the help ate, and they gave me some soup, and I didn't want to eat it, I guess, and it got cold, and I was complaining, and there was this really bossy lady that worked for him that said, she kept getting after me to eat my soup, and I wouldn't do it, and finally I said, it's too cold, and she was frustrated with me. She said, well, put salt in it. Salt warms it up. No, salt cools it down. Put pepper in it. Pepper warms it up and salt cools it down. And so I chucked a bunch of pepper in it to get it hot, and I didn't like that. So I put a whole bunch of salt in it, and I didn't like that. And so I don't know what happened after that, but I didn't eat that soup. That's my first memory.
So your mom went up there because your dad was
Gone to the-
gone to
that's
the
where he
war.
took off to go overseas.
And why would she go up there?
She worked
Nana was up there.
in a munitions factory.
Okay.
And Rosemary took care of me some.
Well, Rosemary was up there, and so was your mother, and so was your grandmother.
Yeah.
And while the men were gone, and then it was after a period of time that Edna said, I've had it with all these guys around here, because I assumed that there was no, they were after women. So she took Dennis, and then Nana sent Rosemary. When she was just 14, because she was getting too thick with guys up there, so they sent them back
They were
to.
hitting on her.
They were hitting on her, yeah, and she says, this is no place for me, so she came back to Logan, and that's when Rosemary and Ham got together while Nana was gone and your mom was watching her,
But
right?
there's
Yeah.
a couple of stories that I think are interesting about the Washington experience, one of which I remember Mom saying she kept a gun, a pistol, by her nightstand. And she woke up in the middle of the night and to some noise that she didn't know what it was. And so she reached in and got her revolver out and then realized that it was Dennis that was standing there. So he almost got taken out. That was the first time. There were more.
Yeah, like many more. There was a story up there that Mom told me quite a lot up in Bremerton, that they went to a park that was kind of up on a hill, and she had me in a little
Oh, yeah.
baby buggy thing, and there were some teenage girls or younger girls that wanted to push me around. You know how they're attracted to little kids like that. So they were pushing me around, and all of a sudden she saw they'd lost control of the baby buggy, and there was a big path or little lawn or something going down into the lake. And my baby buggy was just headed down the hill with nobody there, headed for the water. And she said she jumped up and ran just like crazy all the way down that hill, and we both hit the water about the same time, and she fished me out of the lake.
Oh, my God. And then she added, and there were many men watching, and not one of them.
Yeah, she always said that. Nobody moved except me.
She didn't know how to swim.
Yeah, that's right. She didn't have to swim. She just, motherly instinct took
Yeah.
over, and she saved my bacon.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, the kind of the next thing I remember is,
And Logan going looking for your dad.
we had an apartment on West Center with Mom. It was upstairs, I remember, and And I don't remember this, but Mom told me about it. I wanted to find my dad. She told me about it and everything, and so I was probably only 3 or so by this time, maybe, and I was, yeah, probably 3, I don't know, but you can add it up
About
before
there.
the end of the war, and I was born in 43, but anyway, I walked uptown away from the people that were taking care of me, I guess, and Mom was working at the telephone company, I think, but anyway, I got downtown and there was this little tiny kid walking around, and somebody got me and took me to the police, and the police, they wanted to know what my name was, and I couldn't, I think I called it my school. You know, I couldn't say it. And anyway, they said, well, where are you going? And I said, to find my dad. And where's your dad? In Okinawa. You know, I was looking for my dad in Okinawa is what I was doing.
But you somehow got returned to.
Yeah, somehow I got returned, so I don't know. That's another close brush.
But was it to the right family?
We'll have to do it.
See,
We'll have to do it.
People have never.
They never found their baby
Yeah, that's true. There's a mystery. We'll have to do a genetic test here and see.
I think there's a much resemblance that we can figure out it's all right.
Well,
Let's see.
if Paul was born 4 years after, and your dad came home from the war, you were gonna.
Before he was born.
Yeah. He must have, I'm thinking you were, 3 or under, and then he must have been coming home fairly soon.
Yeah, I can remember when Dad
Because-
came home, I was out playing on a big log out behind our house of some tree that had been cut down, a big poplar or something. It was, I remember the bark was kind of off of it, and he came and told me that he was my dad, and, of course I recognized it, and we hugged and stuff, and anything else I should put in there?
How old were you when he left?
I was probably 2.
You were 2.
Come
And
back
then,
when
how
I
long was he
3.
gone?
He was gone less than, about a year, I think.
Yeah.
He was gone more than, the Battle of Okinawa was in 1945.
Right.
And that was the only battle that he was in. And then soon after that, the war was over. But he was stationed in Korea, in Seoul, as part of the occupation forces after the war. And because he had come in late in the war, being drafted late, he was retained in the service. Many of the others that had fought went home, but he was kept for about a year beyond that. So I think he had actually gone into the Army probably the late fall or winter of 44. Because he had training in Arkansas. He went through a boot camp in Arkansas, and then I think he was stationed in California for some other training, and then put on a boat, a troop ship, and then shipped to the South Pacific. And I think there are some stories there too about
About the
church magazine or.
Yeah, I've written that up and sent to I don't know who all got it, but I wrote Dad's all war stories out
I've
2
got
or 3 years ago.
I have a copy here.
Do you?
I do, so if you want a copy.
And it
of
tells
that.
some, we probably just to save time won't go into his war stories, but they were pretty significant spiritual experiences for him. And
About the dream, about the garments. And then he came back and got married in the temple.
yeah, that's a little later. They didn't get married in the temple to start with, and Paul was born when we did. And maybe I can get
But
to
it was
that.
the war, wasn't it, that made him think that it was a good thing to have garments? And
No, it was after that he had that dream,
Oh.
Yeah,
and so.
but he came back. Let's see, can we all figure this out, the date of conception?
why are we fixated on it?
Your dad.
Part of your heritage. But no, I think he came back in 1946. I think he came back like in the summer of 46. And he was pretty shaken by the war. And he wanted really desperately to just be in solitude. And that was one of the attractions for going back up to Dry Canyon and getting away from everything. He was really troubled by a lot of the visions and things that he had seen. And it was during this period of time that I think he was the genesis of the building of the sawmill. He wanted to build this portable sawmill and get that underway, but that didn't occur right away. They started a mill operation up in Dry Canyon. He would come down to Logan, they would move down to Logan, and we're kind of back and forth between Dry Canyon and Logan, and he did a lot of carpentry work, and I think he built some homes probably in the Logan area as well, didn't he?
I didn't ever remember that part.
I don't-
If he did, I don't know.
I think he did some odd jobs and carpentry kind of things, but
Wasn't he one of the one or two in his whole group that came back, everybody else died in Okinawa? I thought he was like the one or two who survived that.
there was a huge loss in the battalion that he was in. I know that.
He was one of the few that came back anyway.
Yeah.
That would have
You know,
been,
we need to get his war records out of his unit that he was in and what their losses were and all that stuff. It would be interesting. And as members of his family, we can have access to the military records. Because I started it out, and then I kind of left it off because I started reading some accounts of other people in war, and it sickened me so much I didn't want to go into it, you know. So,
Was Okinawa similar to D-Day? Was it an invasion?
yeah, it was actually bigger and more vessels in Okinawa than there was in planes and stuff than D-Day, if I'm remembering it right. And it was the bloodiest battle of all in the whole World War because the Japanese would not give up, and that was starting to get on their what they considered their home territory. And so the Japanese would lose almost everybody before they give up.
I think they had tunnels and stuff even throughout. It was
But
really,
that battle on Okinawa was the triggering of the decision to use the atom bomb.
yeah.
Wow.
Because of their resistance.
Because of their resistance was so fierce. And that was just one of many islands that they were gonna have to conquer on their way to get to Japan. So,
And, you know, I don't know, I shouldn't even put this in, but it's a political statement, but have you seen the picture of the air, from the air of Hiroshima as it looks today? That's been on the internet going around. It's just a massive city. It looks like looking down at Las Vegas. And all the people are living there and everything, and you sort of have been told, you know, we never should have done that because look at all the bad, but I mean, they got a massive city there, it's just thriving.
it's a modern and beautiful city.
Yeah, so there's two sides to that, I guess, but, anyway, do you have anything else you want to put in there, you know?
Then Paul comes along.
Well,
Where was Paul born?
tell us when you were born.
I was born in May 4th, 1947. So not long after Dad came home from the war. And then my earliest recollections are in the Thomas Michelson home there on Poplar Avenue. And I think there are two of the very earliest recollections that I have was one, I actually was in my crib, looking out through the bars of my crib, and seeing those little horse figurines. You remember those, the blue one and
Mhm.
the pink
Yeah.
figurines there? I just remember that, and I remember Mom coming in, picking me up. And then, it was about a little over a year after I was born that Grandma Leola Michelson died. But I have a faint memory of her. I think I was just a toddler, just barely walking. But I have a faint memory of her coming out the back door of the house there. We lived in the apartment behind Grandma and Grandpa Michelson there that they had. And I remember her coming out with a cookie jar and holding it down for me so I could reach my little hand in there. And she used to cook ginger snap cookies. Do you remember that? They were fantastic. And it was a ginger snap cookie, but those were my very earliest memories.
Well, that was about like Pearl around then, or no?
No,
not
Pearl
yet.
came later.
Later.
This was,
That was the same house?
yeah, it was the same house. And then I remember some of my earliest memories were there used to be a big old barn out in the back of that house there. It burnt down. Do you? That's fantastic. But I remember going in there and exploring around. You know how I think kids are attracted to musty old places where there's still some old equipment and stuff in there. And I remember that's where they kept my bicycle. And I think there was a red wagon that I remember it was kept in there. And at that time there were these big, huge poplar trees that were on the west side. There were, wasn't there 2 or 3 or 4 trees to the west of the house there? I remember.
Yeah, there was. I don't know if they were popular, but they were big trees.
I remember used to climb those trees.
Yep, you used to climb up the trees and stuff.
And what part of town was this?
This is called Down on the Island in Logan. It's first south and first east.
Yeah.
It was Poplar Avenue.
It just, it's right now, right
by the park.
It's part of the Central Park there.
Yeah, they tore the
Maryland
house
owns
down.
it.
They have a big substation there, like an electrical substation.
Yeah, right. That was right behind us for a long time, the city places and stuff. One, did you say?
No, go ahead.
One thing that, I don't know, I guess I ought to relate this because it's kind of an unusual thing, but my dad was known to be extremely strict. Paul got away with a lot more than I did.
That's why you pulled out the pliers.
Probably what it was. But he would teach me to flush the toilet by standing there and flushing it for 500 times, or he would tell me the number 500, or to shut the screen door a whole bunch of times. And I used to play. All of us kids would play on the Poplar Avenue right out on the road. And Dad was really worried about us getting hurt. He wouldn't let me go swimming down in Florida without him being there when the young men, young women went. I was a teenager. I could not go to the ocean with him because he was worried that I'd get caught in the undertow. And so he didn't want me playing on the street. And all of us kids ran up and down. There was hardly ever a car come by. And so to teach me not to go in the street, he brought me out there and he said, "Now, Dennis, that's the edge of the road right there." I was probably maybe 4 or 5. It was way before we went to Florida. That's the edge of the road. I know you don't understand where the edge of the road is because you keep going past it. So I want you to study the edge of the road. And he made me do this several times. And he'd just leave me out there for a long time, and I'd be looking around, "Hey, you're not studying the edge of the road." I look down and watch the edge of the road, and he really got me mad, this one time. And once in a while a car would go by, and I would think to myself, I started to think, I could go out in front of the car, and I could go back to my Heavenly Father. I really was seriously thinking of that, and I remember even having an urge to run out in front of a car and just get out of there. And this is a part that I tell you, this is probably the most foundation part of my testimony that I have. But as a little kid, I was considering doing that, and all of a sudden I became aware of a presence, not directly, but through my peripheral vision. I could see a man standing up in the clouds up there, and he told me, he says, "Dennis, I don't want you to come home now. I don't want you to do that. You stay there." And I know that was my Heavenly Father, and to say that you saw a Heavenly Father, I bet it was somehow manifested to me, and my Heavenly Father didn't want me to come home, and it was a really real experience. And so I just wanted to share that with you because that's how I know things. That's the most fundamental thing I know, is that there's a pre-existence, and I have a Heavenly Father back then. So.
Well, how old were you guys when you started going up to Dry Canyon and back
About-
summer?
I was about 3 or 4, and that's a good transition, we lived in a tent the first year up in Dry Canyon. And the mom cooked for all the loggers on a campfire, all their meals, 3 meals a day, took care of us, little kids. Paul was there then, and I remember when Paul was born, and that was just awesome to me. There was no jealousy or rivalry that I remember about, but there was when he came home from his mission. That was, I mean, I picked on him as a big brother, I'll have to admit that. Probably not really bad, but basically I really loved him.
It was bad.
Basically, I really loved Paul dearly, and I can remember looking at his little chubby hands, and you know how a little kid has a little dimples for each knuckle, and I would look at those and I would feel so sorry that I had picked on him and caused him grief, you know, and I remember being moved to tears down then by that little chubby hand of his, and then down in Florida he got, wasn't it down there you got polio?
When we were coming back to Utah.
Yeah, he did.
Save that story, so
Okay,
stay on
all right, so, let's see, where was I? Going
You're going up
to
on
Dry
the
Canyon,
10
yeah.
Can you just look at the recorder one more time, make sure it's still going good?
Yep, it's
You
going.
guys gotta speed up.
Gotta speed up.
Isn't this a 2-day event?
Yeah, we'll never get it all out, but,
I need to stay with that much power's in it.
yeah. So,
I got batteries.
we went up Dry Canyon and lived in this tent. I remember it being quite cold, and Mom cooking on it and everything, and
What I remember are the showers
Yeah.
up there. To describe the shower rig that we
that
had.
happened a little bit later. That we had an outhouse. Of course, Dad built a little cabin after about a year, but it was 2-room cabin, a bedroom, and then a combination kitchen with a little
Paper towels in
sitting
here.
with another bed where I slept. And Paul slept in the crib or in the their bedroom, I think. And we did get a shower. Dad built out of just rough lumber a little room across the creek from the house. And we would fill a big 50-gallon drum, climb up a little ladder and dump buckets in it. And then it had a little spigot out of it that you could turn on, and there was a place that you build a fire under it. And so it was either too hot or too cold. It was quite an experience. Mostly I remember cold in there, don't you?
Yeah.
Take the shower there. And
How many months out of the year did you live up there?
well, just from when, as soon as the snow left and we could get up there. In fact, I remember one year going up to see if the roads were clear enough, and we were in the car. We got up to where the snow quit, and Mom and Dad left me in charge of Paul to go on. And then they went on up, to hike on up as far as they could. And it seemed like, you know, kids, they were just gone forever. And there was a bag of cream puffs sitting there. And I couldn't stand it any longer, and so I ate a cream puff or two, and as soon as Dad got back, he says, he picked the bag, look, who's been eating the cream puffs? Not me. I don't know. You know, and probably blamed it on Paul, and not me. And finally, he gave me about 3 chances to answer truthfully, and finally he says, well, I want you to explain then what that cream is on the end of your nose. So, and then I remember a lecture that I would not get in as much trouble if I told the truth as I would if I didn't.
What gave them the idea to go up and do the sawmill? Or now was Thomas was doing that too?
Thomas and his brothers ran a sawmill at Beaver Canyon,
Oh.
and
Is that where the ski resort is?
pardon?
The
Yeah.
ski resort is?
Yeah, instead of going to the left right away, you just keep going up the canyon, you follow the Beaver Creek up there, and you'll find evidence of a sawmill where they've kind of got a campground and a clearing now, some camp spots.
I think we went up there one time.
Yeah. And did you point out they made a ramp where they'd take one wagon up or they'd roll the logs into a wagon that was on the lower part of the
Yeah.
ramp?
And they even, I can't believe it, but you go up and look at they dug a canal through the rock and stuff on up to a higher place where water would come into it, and they divert water up there and float logs down the hill. But it's a long, wide, fairly deep thing. I just don't have any idea how they did that back in those days.
You guys incorporate, tell that story about your grandfather with the horses pulling all
That's
those
what I was
logs.
just gonna ask.
Yeah, it
Is
was
that
pro-
when that happened?
Yeah, my grandpa was around, I think he was around 18 when this happened, something like that. And he was working up in the sawmill, and his job was to take a load of big logs, and there was just 3 of them on it. 2 of them were great big logs that fit the side, and then 1 log up on top and all chained on, and he was way up on top holding the reins. It had been raining and coming down, probably from Beaver, I'm pretty sure, the Dugway area where it got steep, and there was ruts and a little bit of mud and stuff, and the wagon started to get away from him, and he was pulling on the brake, and the wheels were skidding, and he was gaining speed, and all of a sudden it flipped him up in the air, and he lost the reins, and he fell forward. And it was sometime probably in the fall, because he had his Mackinac on, he called it, a big old coat. And
The horses were running too.
yeah, the horses were going, and he totally lost the reins and control and flipped forward, and as he fell, he knew he was gonna land in front of this skinny little wheel with all these logs on top. And so as he fell, he said, I just said, Lord, spare my life. And he hit the ground, and the wagon came to an instant stop, and it ran up on his Mackinac just a little bit, and it took him a pull or 2, and he ripped his coat out from under it and somersaulted backwards over it, and then they went on down the hill and never tipped over, but
In suspended animation, mind you, you
Yeah.
gotta understand, a great big thing
Oh,
going fast
yeah,
down a hill,
yeah.
and then it's just nothing until
Yeah.
you get out of the way.
Yeah.
yeah, it was, he told me
Can't
that
think how many
story.
near-death experiences you
Yeah.
particularly have had, Uncle Dennis.
Yep,
Didn't he
He's
come out and mouth on a
experiencing one
brother
right
of
now.
his?
yeah. His,
Drowned?
he had a brother that they used to go in St. Charles Creek and fish up with their hands underneath the bank, and they could trap a big trout now and then and pull them out. And this one brother fell in, and got and I think it was, can't remember which brother it was, but he fell in, and it took him downstream a little bit, and he couldn't find him, and he prayed and just dove in and found him and hauled him out, and he was unconscious, and he says he was just inspired to push on his chest and try to get water out of him, and breathed in his mouth, and
He
got
breathed in
him
his
revived.
mouth, which was not done at that
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
and then brought him back.
Yeah, so that was, I wish I had remembered the details of that better, but that was one of his stories that he told.
Well, didn't he have an encounter with a bear?
That was Jacob. Did that story ever come out? To Jacob's
heard that.
encounter with the bear?
I did hear about that. I don't know the details of it.
The best, well, you want to tell it?
No, I can't remember much
The
about it.
best I can tell is he was up in this mountains above Bear Lake. I guess it's called Bear Lake for a reason, but he was up there, and he was on his horse with his rifle, and he came across a bear, and the bear charged him, and he had his gun down at him. I don't know if he got a shot off or not, but the bear took his gun away from him and got a little bit sidetracked with the gun, and so Grandpa Jacob was able to ride off it enough to get away from it, and when he went back and got his gun after that, I don't know how long it took, but he went back, the barrel was bent some, and that's a family heirloom someplace in this family. I don't know where it is.
Wow.
It's quite a story.
Yeah.
Who was it who lost their pants in the sawmill or something?
Oh, that's a wonderful story.
Their dad.
This is Thomas Michelson,
Okay.
and we had a big motor that I think we had 2 of them there that would run different parts of the sawmill, and they had a drive shaft running out that OSHA would have a big fit over it for a good reason. And there was a U-joint in it. You know what that is, you know? A gear in it that lets it flex a little bit. And my grandpa, there was no covering over it, no guard over it, nothing. And you just step over it. It was about this far off the ground, something like that, going over to the sawmill. And my grandpa Michelson would step over that all the time. And Dad says, don't do that. It's going to catch your pants or something, and it's going to kill you. And so he never listened to it. He stepped over one day, and that U-joint grabbed his pants and ripped the pant leg right off of him. And how that happened without just winding him up and flipping him around, I don't know. It pulled his pant leg off, and
Weak thread.
and so he's standing there with his garments hanging out one side and his pant leg on the other side. And Dad said he just kind of looked around and threw his axe over his shoulder and went whistling down with it. It didn't ruffle him at all. You know, went down and got some more heads.
I'm thinking of, did Paul get stuck on a log somewhere?
That's when he got lost.
And was this up at the sawmill?
Up at the sawmill. You want to tell that story?
No.
You remember it, Paul?
I remember it. He was probably how old? 2 or 3?
I think I was close to 3.
Close to 3, something like that. And we had if you go up to the sawmill, the cabin was, you know, there's a little trail up to the spring that we use for our water. And in the middle of this trail, you could go around this big bush or around this way, a big old willow bush or something in there, and you could go one way or the other. So Mom had left me in charge of him, I think, and he got away from me, and he followed Mom up there, and she came back and didn't ever see him. And we actually didn't know where he went, but we found out from what canyon we found him in later on that he had gone up that way, and they probably passed each other at that bush, where she came around one way and he went around the other way looking for her. And so he disappeared up into the hills, and we didn't know up which direction to go at all. And so she sounded the alarm, and we all came down and just hunted quickly and couldn't find him, and called, and then they sent one of the workers or somebody down to St. Charles, and I'm telling you, the whole town came up there to look for him. And Dad assigned me one area to look in. It was to the left and up in where there's some massive rocks and stuff, and you could hear people calling, Paul, Paul, you know, and Dad told us to pray and everything, and I don't know how many prayers I said to try to find him. And Dad prayed and felt impressed to go up that road toward the spring, and he was just led by the Spirit. There was no footprints or anything for a while, and then he started finding a footprint or little thing now and then, but he was able to follow him up into quite a ways up into the mountains, I think toward the left as you go up there. And he first saw Paul trying to climb across a big old log. He was kind of stuck with his foot over or something, and he was crying, and Dad noticed a little rabbit was sitting off there just watching him.
Was he asleep?
No, he wasn't asleep. He was trying to get over that log, and he was crying. And
I think he thought he fell asleep or something because it was quite a long time.
yeah,
Big dance.
yeah, but I don't know if you even remember anything
Do you
about
remember
that.
that at all, Paul?
Yeah, he was really little.
Too
And
traumatic.
it was a terrible experience, but it turned out so wonderful because Dad just knew that it was the Spirit of the Lord that helped him go the right directions to find him. And, you know, I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't found him.
Yeah.
You know, get cold up there, and
You wouldn't be here.
I would be here. That's probably true.
Was Potbelly about up there?
Potbelly we need to tell that story. That was down in Florida.
Oh.
And so,
I gotta get my boy to hear this.
yeah.
Well, what other side?
Adam, get all the boys.
That was, the pliers story was up in the sawmill up
Okay, tell
there.
us that one.
I'll tell you the pliers story. Again, I was left watching Paul.
You have their lesson by this time?
We had a load of lumber on the Diamond T, and we were just getting evening, and we were just getting ready to take this load of lumber down home. And we parked it right over there was a culvert that went right underneath the road, right by the cabin. And we parked the truck there, and Mom and Dad went into Mom and Dad went into the cabin for something or other, and they were in there for a long, long time, it seemed. And so,
What were they doing?
I don't know what they were doing. Yeah, there's a thought. He is obsessed with that.
It really is. He has a fixation.
Yeah, so am I just don't talk about it.
Is this the Potbelly story?
No, this is a plier story.
Oh, it's down the pliers.
And so, anyway, there was a pair of pliers in the Diamond T, and Paul was sitting there on the seat, they're probably up on his knees or something, and you know how the sun can come through just right, and you can see every tiny little hair that was there, and I just couldn't resist going in behind him with a pair of pliers and getting one of those hairs, and just go boink, and he'd squawk, and holler, and after a couple of times, just a couple of hairs, my dad's like, "What's going on out there?" "Dad, this is pulling my hair." And, "You cut it out." And so there was several exchanges like that. And finally, I couldn't stand anymore, and I boinked one more. And my dad just come running out of the cabin like a gorilla. And he threw the door open and grabbed me out of the truck and grabbed me by the heels and dumped me up and down in the culvert. My head went in the culvert, I swear. Like that, you know. So I didn't ever do that again.
He was fond of that. That's a good segue into the other one.
Yeah.
The story like that.
Polly,
It is.
Polly,
Paul
get
got it.
Faith.
Let's see, did you get who you were going to
I
get?
want you to listen to this story.
Yeah, I got
I
Sam
can tell
right
this
here.
one, 'cause
Okay.
I have first.
But wait just a second till
Yeah.
we get a couple more grandkids in here.
But
Okay.
this was in Florida, Potbelly was?
Yeah, but while you're getting grandkids, I have to tell you the one about Sylvester the cat. We had mice in that cabin, and so Dad got a cat, and that cat was afraid of mice. I swear. He just said it was just, you know, there's Sylvester the cat on the
Yeah.
cartoon, so they named him that. And he had no respect for that cat. But one day, there was a big wide belt that came off of that big motor that ran the sawmill, you know, that big old belt that went around. And one day, Sylvester got on that belt and was getting sucked down toward the big pulley in the sawmill. And Dad was trying to frantically figure out how to shut it down, but he said that cat realized there was trouble and just humping it, trying to get back up the belt and just making, you know, barely a little bit of progress. We made it out of it.
Oh.
The end of Sylvester?
No, Sylvester made it out. I don't know what happened to it, but Sylvester made it out. I used to take an old tire that was up there, and I would roll it up the hill. And it would take me a long time to roll this thing up the hill, but I realized, and then I'd let it go down towards the sawmill. And it would just go flying down the hill, and it would usually hit a log down there and just bounce up in the air, and Dad says, "Cut it out! You're gonna kill somebody!" So a little while later, I'd go back up the hill again, and the further I got, the higher that tire bounced. And that's
Explaining a lot.
But I never did hurt anybody, but I remember doing that and him getting mad at me. And
You did it till you got tired.
yeah, until I got tired. Well, now there it comes out. Mom used to tell that story to brag about how determined I was. I wouldn't give up on something. I'd keep going.
Let's hear the Potbelly.
Okay, you tell the Potbelly story.
Check the thing, make sure it's going.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we were down in Florida, and I'm not sure why we started this little tradition, but we started to call Dad Pop. Do you remember why we
Yeah.
started?
No, we did call him Pop.
No, we did.
So, yeah.
We called him Pop. And one day I was over at the sawmill.
By the shop.
Yeah, he was in the shop area. I think he was doing some welding or something out there. And I went walking by him and I said, "Hi, Pop Belly."
Paul insists he called him Pop Belly. I thought, and I think Dad thought, it was Pot Belly. But there's a variation on the story, but he knows what he
It was
said.
Pop Belly. Pop Belly. But anyway, and he said, "Now, Paul," he said, "that's not very respectful." And he says, "I don't want you to call me that." And so I just kind of tucked that thought away, and I went about my business. And then I decided, well, I'm going to try this again. So I crawled up in the rafters above to watch him work down there, and he'd walk by every now and again. And one time he walked by, and I said, "Hi, Pop Belly."
He's up in the rafters.
And he says, "Paul," he said, "if you call me that again," he said, "you see that big rain barrel over there?" And kept a big old rain barrel there that was filled with water that they would
That ran off the roof.
cool the metal in after welding it or working on it. And he says, if you call me that again, he says, you're going in that barrel. And so I thought I was up to the challenge. So I went out away from the sawmill as far as I could get. And then I just yelled as loud as I could, Pop Belly!
I remember it like this. Pot belly!
This is in Florida, right?
This is in Florida. So I saw him put down his tools, and he started running from me. And I ran in, and I thought, that old guy, he could never catch up. But he did. And when he caught up to me, sometimes, and I think this is true of all kids, sometimes you don't know when your parents are serious or when they're still kidding with you or whatever, but I thought it was a big joke.
I knew Dad was serious, and I was loving it.
But the moment that he caught up to me and he put me under his arm, I knew that he was serious. There was no joke about this. And so he didn't say a word to me. He just hauled me back under his arm.
But Dad was so wore out from chasing him, and probably from heart problems that we didn't know he had.
Yeah, probably almost killed him. Yeah.
But he had Paul, and I remember him telling me that he just had to rest up out there for a little while before he could haul him back in. So he held him out there for a little while in a headlock.
But we got back to the mill, and sure enough, he made good on his word. He tipped me upside down, grabbed me by the feet, and dunked me in that barrel. And I thought he was going to drown me. I seriously didn't think I was going to come up.
Yeah, he did more than once. It was like up and down.
Waterboard. I think they call that waterboarding.
Yeah. That's right. But that was the last time I called him. I called him that.
How old were you when this happened?
I think I must have been about 9, 8, probably about 9, maybe 10.
Yeah, something like that.
About 9 or 10.
9 or 10, that's pretty big.
Dodging in like a little 5-year-old.
He was rebellious for a long time.
Yeah, I think I was 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I think we might have missed the fence post with your eyes.
Yeah, I should tell that story. Do you remember that very well?
Not a lot, no. But
Well,
I've had it told to me several
yeah,
times.
I was outside playing with Paul, and there were sometimes cattle around there. Then there would be bullfights that we'd watch, and
This is a
it was up at the sawmill up at Bear Lake. There were cattle up there, open range, and there would be bullfights sometimes. And I loved to watch these big bulls go at each other, and stuff. But they didn't want us out around, and so they told us to stay. And Dad had made this, what do you call that fence that is square like this around, it's not barbed wire, but it's a wire fence around it with squares on it.
Chicken wires.
Chicken wire or something, it's not the little ones, but anyway. And it seemed like there might have been, no, there wasn't any barbed wire on that I remember. But I liked to climb over that fence, and this is when we were quite little. I think he was, how old were you when this happened, you remember?
I think it was about 3.
About 3 or so, something like that, little tiny kid. And so that would make me 7 or 8. And I would climb over this fence on the lowest part, and we got it sagged down quite a bit from climbing over it. Probably got in trouble over that. And then I'd try to climb over the higher part as it got closer to the fence, and the higher part, he was following me climbing over the fences. And all of a sudden I heard him screaming, and I looked over, and there was a loose wire hanging off the top of the fence. So it seemed like about that long. It was kind of curled down, and it had stuck right in his eye. And I just ran over to him, and being a little kid, I didn't know how to get it out really carefully. I just pulled it out of his eye. Oh my gosh, and he had kind of, his eye was hanging down there, not his eyeball, but the eyelid was hanging down, and it was bleeding, and oh my gosh, it was just horrible. And Mom came out, or I don't know what happened. We loaded in the Diamond T, and I had to ride on the back of the Diamond T all the way down there to Logan to hurry and get to the doctor. And I remember hanging onto the back, out on the bed, looking in that window at that little eye looking back at me, and I felt so terrible. And they took him to the doctor, and there's variations. Like Grandpa Michelson probably exaggerated some things, but I know that they were concerned about his sight, mostly about a tear duct that they felt had been torn loose, and the doctor said that he would always have a weepy eye because it tore out that tear bag and tear duct or something. And so my grandpa gave him a blessing, and I remember him saying that he felt that he was like floating in the air. He just felt a tremendous feeling from the Spirit, and promised Paul his eye would be okay. And so you can take it from there.
There's a follow-up to that, isn't there?
What about the dressing that you had on the eye?
Yeah, well, according to Mom, she didn't have any bandages big enough to cover that bloody eye, and so she used a woman's accoutrements.
Great and
I
sanitary,
seem like I remember seeing that. He
sterile.
must have got it off or something. I remember that eye looking at me, and I felt so terrible.
But this was related to me by Grandpa Michelson too, and before he died. And he said the same thing. And there were three men in the circle. There was Dad, and also the temple president.
President Raymond?
President Raymond was in the circle when they gave me a blessing. And Mom related this to me too. But the doctors had told her that there was a good possibility that I would lose the eye, but they would do their best to save the eye. But they said for sure that the tear duct system had been obliterated, and that it would weep, but they thought that they could put a drain through my nose, connected with my eye, so that when I would weep, I would cry through my nose. But I think the surgical remedies were pretty archaic, back in those ancient days. But they were.
Wait, I just ran out of tape. Let me switch the tape.